Are you a writer? The kind of writer who knows just what a good writer you are. With absolute certainty that every word you write is the right word. Not a doubt in your mind. Well then, I think you might have downloaded the wrong podcast. Sorry. Welcome to the Failing Writers Podcast in association with Scrivener.
Hello to all you lovely word wrestling champions.
Hello there.
Hope you're all well and managing to get a bit of scribbling in.
Oh yeah, got to keep yourself scribblicious, haven't you?
You do. And you probably ought to make the whole process of scribbling easier, really, because scribbling is actually a lot harder than it looks.
It really is. And I think we've learned, haven't we, over the last 5 seasons of this podcast, the hard way, I would say.
Yeah.
So, John, tell us, with everything that we've learned, how can we make this whole scribbling business more streamlined, easier? Yeah, I mean, you must have some kind of solution up your sleeve.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, Tom, because yes, I actually do.
Oh, thank God.
The amazing writing software, Scrivener, of course.
The ones who happen to be our sponsors.
They are. That is true, Tom. But we would recommend them even if they weren't. In fact, we used to recommend them before they started sponsoring us.
True.
So it's totally legit.
Yeah, fair enough, that. And they do make exceedingly tasty writing applications, don't they? Which can massively speed up and organise the process of writing your novel, your screenplay, non-fiction book, letter of complaints to the neighbours about the noise.
Yeah, they do.
Everything.
All of that. And the deal is even sweeter because you can get 20% off at literatureandlatte.com.
Yeah, just use our special code, FAILING.
That's the fella.
Well, I'm glad we had this completely impromptu chat, John. I think that's been really helpful. I hope people have taken it on board. Thank you.
You're absolutely welcome, mate. Let's do our special little handshake to celebrate.
Oh, can we? Yeah, cool.
Failing writers forever.
We are the coolest, aren't we?
We're so cool.
That was really cool. Oh, I wish people could have seen that.
I love doing that.
Yeah.
Moving swiftly
on. It's
on.
good for my back, though. You know, with a bit in the middle.
Yeah.
I don't know if I should do the reach around thing.
No, it's verging on the dangerous, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the best bit, though, isn't it? It's the most fun bit.
Yeah.
We should move swiftly on because
Yeah.
we've got a lot to pack in, haven't we, today? We've got an absolute feast for the senses, haven't we, Tommy?
Oh, we bloody well have.
And actually, it's the first in a mini-series we've got of our adventures north of the border in bonny Scotland.
Yeah, we took ourselves off on a field trip, didn't we, to Edinburgh, to immerse ourselves in a bit of the Scottish literary world and the culture, writing culture up there.
And we're kicking off this week with an amazing chat with an absolute literary force of nature.
Oh, yeah. We discuss... God, what don't we discuss? We discuss the love of words, the secret of developing an astonishing vocabulary.
Oh, my God,
yeah. And we'll be talking about being unafraid to commit to your craft, as well as moving to a country where it's cheaper to live, just so you can afford to do nothing but write for a year.
Yeah, and also about the importance of creative friends and about poetry shame, especially for young men. We all know about poetry shame.
Oh, yes.
And also the difference between writing poetry and writing novels.
Yeah, but mainly the joy of this episode is who we're talking to, because I think if you're anything like John and me, you're just gonna love sitting back and listening to a writer with such an insanely rich grasp of the lexicon that language in his hands just kind of becomes music.
I like that. I fully agree, because today's guest is Michael Pederson, poet, memoirist, current Edinburgh Makar, i.e. Edinburgh's Poet Laureate, and also debut novelist following his most recent book release, Muckle Flugger, which you might have seen knocking around your local bookshop. But you're right, Tom, he's got a beautiful way with words, hasn't he?
He has.
Yeah. In fact, can I just play you a little clip? Because I saw Holly McNish describing Michael the other day on YouTube, and she said...
And I'm going to read the prologue, because the prologue is also amazingly written, also beautiful. Michael's texts are also beautiful. His emails are also beautiful. The way he talks is amazing. It's just great. So I'm so glad to be here.
Sums him up nicely. So, we got together with him in the back room of Portobello Bookshop just outside Edinburgh. So a huge thank you to them for being so lovely and letting us go and bringing us coffee and everything.
They were ace.
Yeah, so we met Michael there to have a chat. In fact, we were having such a nice chinwag. We genuinely didn't realise we'd been talking for like an hour and a half. And we were like, sorry for keeping you so long.
Yeah.
But, it's his fault really, isn't it? If you don't want that to happen,
It is.
maybe tone down all that wordy goodness.
Yeah, quite. Let that be a lesson to you, Michael. So without further ado, here's quite a long but a wonderful chat with Michael Pederson, starting with a discussion about the best techniques to get you writing.
Yeah, you come into so many people looking for the answer, don't you? And I guess we're such sort of peculiar mercurial creatures. There is no answer, but you can suck up as much sort of sapience and erudition and tips from other people, and you make your own cocktail out of that, really, about
and
what
you decide what
for
you're going
you.
to discard and you decide what you're going to put into practice.
Murakami, he runs, doesn't he? He loves to run. He loves to get in his peak physical condition when he's writing a novel, and he does the biggest runs of the year in between writing periods, and he feels like his runs reflect what he writes. And he's now written a sort of small novella or chapbook, I think, on running and writing at the same time. And then you get other people that just want inactivity, to close out the world, to lock themselves in this box of a room, not see anyone, not hear anything other than their own voices and own monologues.
I think that's my downfall in my writing, is that I feel like I need a clear space. I need a vacuum to write in.
Which never happens,
And
basically.
being a human, there's always something with the kids, or something that he's doing, or there's a thing, or at work. So there's never that romantic, peaceful, idyllic kind of, let's do some writing.
Yeah.
I think I'm slowly getting my head around the fact that you just need to actually suck it up and put your big boy pants on.
And then you learn to contradict everything you'd taken as sacred. I used to be a bit of a residency junkie, which is, quite a great thing to be. You lose all your belongings. You take the bare essentials. I take like 5 books that I think will inspire me across the genres. I've written books in like old historic towers in Northern Ireland, to dilapidated chateaus outside France, to like really unusual isolated places. Then lockdown happened, and living in a flat in the centre of a city, I probably did the best writing of my life, isolated from the world in a sense, but actually in my own home with all my belongings about, and completely contradicted my whole sort of transitional speech I'd given to students and writers alike about the fact that like leaving your home and going to this place with unfamiliar circumstances, with none of your personal belongings about, and then did the exact opposite of it. Don't get me wrong, it took a worldwide pandemic.
It's an extreme
lockdown to force me into that corner, but now it's like, I can write pretty well at home.
So
it's
do you do that now? Have you taken
it's
that
a
forward,
mix.
or do you...
Well, the problem is you develop all these sort of paradigms and structures, and then because I'm a little traitor of all the genres, I've written 3 poetry books, a non-fiction book, and now moved into novels. The format that I've developed within any particular genre that works really well for me with that style of writing then just crumbles apart when I try and move it into a different field. So it's almost like
So you
starting from scratch again.
In how your head needs to get around it, and how you deal with it within your life, if you like.
A little bit, yeah, in terms of time and space, and like it's very...
So it's not all just writing, it's very different in your head.
It's not, it's different in my head in terms of like mood and environment, all of those ingredients for writing. I guess the writing itself feels like it comes from a very similar compulsion or similar sort of emotive apparatus, but the actual mood and environment and the amount of time I've got dictates what I'll write as well.
Yeah.
Especially with prose, non-fiction and fiction even more so, long-form prose. I don't do it in stolen moments, whereas poems are sort of bred for that, aren't you? You're supposed to catapult into someone's life and pull yourself back out of them. Yeah, they're disloyal to chronologies, timelines, reality. They're not supposed to be consistent reads, and they don't have consistent characters or narratives. Everything about them is whole sort of potpourri of emotions and senses. Whereas a novel, if you're sort of far into the mix of it, any character you pick up, any plot line you tinker with, it reverberates throughout the whole beast. What feels like sort of nuanced small changes all of a sudden become quite big character-defining moments that maybe contradict the past that you've written in.
Yeah, there's a whole butterfly effect.
Yeah.
I need to go back now, and then that means that entire... No, then she can't do that. It's like...
Yeah.
As it crumbles underneath you. Obviously in a poem or something short, you're in much more control.
The whole world's on a
confined,
page in front of you. You know, any change you make, it's visually obvious.
Does this mean you've had to sort of almost reinvent the way that you write when you're writing a novel?
Yeah.
That Muckle Flog is your debut, isn't it?
Novel, yeah.
So
yeah, it basically means I'm flying by the seat of my pants under every guise I travel. Poetry, you know, I'm 3 books in now. I mean, you know, I've worn a lot of hats in the poetry world, so I'm quite confident with that, or I know where I stand with it at least. Whereas, you know, with all of the others, I still feel like a tourist within each of those genres.
Yeah.
If you're writing and publishing your first book within any genre that has such a sort of rich literary history, one book in, if it worked out, which, you know, thankfully it has both times, you then feel like maybe it was a fluke, and then you're sort of waiting to see how you're going to go second time round. So you're sort of trepidatious and suspicious of your own good fortunes, I think.
right.
But I love it. I love writing first and foremost. I love stories. Each time that I feel I'm connecting with something which is going to become a book that feels like it has a lastability to it, that feels like it's evolving me as a writer. I'm like a kid at Christmas each time that, you know, I've jumped a hurdle that I've came across on the page. So, I guess I love the maverick element of it, which is maybe why I've been so keen to move around genres. I love working out whether I can work myself out within this genre. And I've always done it quite kooky ways. Like the novel, for example, over lockdown, I'd been doing some script writing with a TV director. He did that amazing series Ludwig. He's now doing the new series of Slow Horses, and he'd done Guilt, a big BBC BAFTA winning one up here. And me and him, you know, we didn't have as much going on during lockdown. So we would meet up, and he gave me a bit of a tutelage in what it was like to write screenplays. And we did this script treatment, and then we did a series of episodes for a sort of series we were exploring. But really, we were just learning how to write together. That was the main thrust of it all. And we showed it to his agent, but it was none of our primary purpose projects. So when it came to writing the novel, I tried to do one of those quite elaborate, sprawling storyboards that I've seen on lots of other writers' admirers' Instagrams. Yeah. And it just didn't...
The ones that kind of look like, you know, when they go in the basement of a serial killer in a movie and it's got all these things joined up and you think, oh, this is someone's twisted mind.
It looks incredible. Kind of, those sort of...
intricate storyboard with... post-it notes and pieces of string connecting this, that, the other, and
they look like conceptual art. Some of them.
Yeah.
I think if you came across one of them in the white cube or the tape modern, you'd be like, "Yes, here is an insight into this person's mind, and it is as chaotic as I anticipated it being." But it just didn't work for me. I tried to do it, I lost focus with it. So I ended up using his script synopsis formula and the scripting software to try and write a synopsis for a novel in a way. And then when it advanced, I told myself that Muckle Flugga is based on a script synopsis for a script that never got written for a film that never got made. And it's not a precedent I've seen, you know, advertised as a way to write a novel before, but it worked for me because I guess being so accustomed to writing poetry, and even with the non-fiction book, the Boyfriends one I did, which is about male friendship, I was trying to Trojan horse poetry in there at every juncture and essay. I was flattening them out, hiding them in between the chapters. You know, I was disguising poems within the body of this non-fiction book. And some of them got weeded out and some of them jumped through the editorial pen. And in a way, it's a very poetic piece of prose. I couldn't do that to the same extent with the novel, so I held myself back. And in that script synopsis, it literally went, characters, location, happening. And I didn't let myself write any of the dialogue or any of the poetic descriptions of the weather, the island, the landscape, the things that I knew I had a propensity for, and the things that I was most anticipating writing. I held myself back from writing all of those elements and really just built something, a structure, which felt like I had a driving story engine. It wasn't emotionless, but it was very nearly mechanical in how it described the progression of the story. And that way, when I went to write the novel, like chapter 1, page 1, as I felt it would appear in the book, I held myself back from such a long period of time that it felt like I was this sort of wild horse being let out of the stable, and all of the dialogue and the poetic description just came so quickly because I'd denied myself being able to engage with that side of the writing.
But then you cleverly built yourself a safe space to do it with the framework that meant you were still...
It meant I wasn't going to get lost in the wilderness of poetic aberration or poetic description or abstraction, which I could risk having a tendency to do because I love that type of
I get that vibe,
fun.
Maybe that could be 3 days later, you come out the room going, oh no, what have I done? I've gone off on a
got sidetracked
tangent here.
It's like those Billy Connolly stand-up sets he would do where he would sort of tell you a story and he goes off on 5 different junctures for about 45 minutes and then brings it back down to the end, and you realise you've actually been told one sort of 3-minute story with a 45-minute tangent in the middle of it. So I had to make sure that didn't happen. It works brilliantly in stand-up, but so it meant that each time that I indulged myself with the poetic writing, the sort of human gazing out into the vastness of the world, trying to pontificate their reason and place and being within it, I was brought back pretty quickly by where the story needed to go. So it involved a very different style and a very different discipline than I'd ever been used to before.
I noticed, I was reading some reviews, but I noticed there was a couple of times you're either accused or praised, depending on how you look at it, of having like a self-conscious wonder of language. Which is, that's an odd criticism for me, because I think surely that's
criticism of a writer.
Surely that's a good thing. What's your response to that?
That's far too many words.
So it will always be the most divisive aspect of my writing. People will relish it or they'll seethe against it. Hemingway I am not, with bare minimum adjectives, focusing on the shortest, punchiest syntactic structure of a sentence available to them. And it's a immersive and admirable quality, but it's not the type of writer I am nor want to be. I've just got to make sure within my own flamboyance of language that it's as purposeful as possible. And that for me is all about collaboration with a good editor and having a good self-editor within myself. I've always loved language. I've always been ensorcelled by it, always been enthralled by language. And I didn't grow up with that type of language around me. It was quite a working class family. People weren't using highfalutin language around me. Didn't have a lot of readers. There was no writers, academics, professionals of that variety. I had a big family, lots of trades in the family, nurses, mechanics, hairdressers. So there was a lot of really good spoken, fun, vibrant language, but not necessarily big readers. And definitely not really real endorsements of the lexicon that I've learned to love. So when I discovered a new word, I never felt alienated by it. I always wanted to understand it, to learn to wield it with exactitude, because I felt by using it, it could make me a more powerful kid from a perspective of someone that was probably quite shy, quite quiet, wasn't really fitting in the mould of the immediate friendship groups around me at that point in time, so was constantly searching for a more empowered version of myself, and I decided language is a thing it could do that. And I never, since I was young, I've transferred this document from written form into print form in various incarnations. I would write down words that I came across that I never knew what they meant, and I would write out by hand at first their dictorial definition, and then I would write out the book that I found them in, and then I would come back to it, and if I'd either used that word out loud conversationally, or then further on when I started writing, I would write the sentence that I conjured to include it in the piece. So I have this weird thesaurus and dictorial document that is called Word Dad that I've had for...
What age did this start from?
I've had it over 20 years, so I guess I started it in my teens, but it pre-existed in my mind before then as well.
Did other people around you know about this, or was it a little dirty secret with your word fetish?
So I guess the sort of advanced manifestation of that is, as soon as I wanted to wield these words, I wrote poems with them. And it definitely became known amongst my friendship group that I wrote poetry. I'd spoke about it to one friend, and then word was out. And I would hide these poetry books with, like, my life depended on them, and my friends would search for them like demented zombies, trying to track down where they were. I actually hid it for years, stuffed down the sort of throat of a golf bag. I wasn't a big golfer, so I thought that was quite a safe place. And then eventually a couple of my friends found it, they read it out to each other, and, you know, I was humiliated, I was mortified, I was a bit teary about it. And then eventually that became emboldening, because I'd sort of fessed up to writing poetry. I'd taken the slagging would continue, but none of it would be as bad as that initial discovery where they could, you know, quote in particular a poem which is as angsty as it sounds, called Boy in the Corner. Right. It's sort of almost written in response to Michael Jackson's song Man in the Mirror back then, looking at himself from that perspective. I found my way into that narrative. But then after that it became more and more emboldening, because then I could write a bit more freely. It was already known, it was old news. There was no real playground kudos to be earned by Michael writes poems, let's slag him about it, because it's sort of been done. It's sort of been done. And you know, when I took over, this is jumping several decades forward now, but when I took over as Edinburgh Makar, as the poet laureate here in Edinburgh, the first thing I did was to launch the Edinburgh Makar's Poetry Prize and go around a lot of inner city state schools, particularly those that are under-resourced and have a lower percentage of people going off to higher education, including my own old one, and try to encourage a mass fessing up to writing, whether it's poetry or anything.
Oh, it's anonymous.
Telling this story about how much easier it got once people knew about it. And, you know, you might feel tender about it, there might be some silliness, there might be some mockery, but once that's over and done with, you then have this emotional device. You then have this sort of additional string to your bow which can prop you up, which can navigate you through tricky situations. I then started writing in Scots. Not because I was that adept a Scots speaker, mainly because we were learning it in school and we got given this big Scots dictionary, and I thought, I can sort of translate my angsty teenage love poems into Scots, publish them in the high school magazine, which was called the Porty Blethers, which specialised in Scots language, basically just ran by one teacher that loved the Scots language. Not widely read, you know, maybe a readership of maybe 10 to 12.
That's more than I'd guessed, to be honest.
Per season. Well, considering they often publish 20 writers per edition, I mean, it meant even those that submitted pieces weren't necessarily reading them.
That's a perfect place to put out your poetry for the first time, isn't it?
It's such a safe little coddle of a nest. Also, it meant if people picked it up to try and give you a ribbon about it, they would have to crack out the dictionary too in order to translate your angst into, the real gooey angst that it was, in order to give you a bit of a ribbon. And I thought by that point they've earned their stripes. So I thought that was a really interesting way into it. Almost giving me these masks and obfuscations, and then you get more adept as a writer and you think, well, actually, if I want to mask and obfuscate my own emotions, I can do it cleverly with metaphors, and I can make this very personal thing to me more universal, so someone feels like maybe they're reading about their own experiences rather than mine, and in that way we're forming something of companionship. I'm not necessarily giving something away, but welcoming someone in. And I actually took that to the next juncture. When I was going off to uni, knew I wanted to study something that was word-based, and I was, first kid from my family to go to university across all the cousins, all the siblings, everything. So there was a bit of heated discussion about what I was going to study, and English and creative writing was not highest on the agenda.
For you or the family? For
the family. And then I'd got pretty good grades, so it was decided I should do one of the subjects that demanded those grades.
Proper subject.
Proper subject that maybe had a job at the end of it, might even call it vocational. So I went to uni to study law. And I had a long sort of think about this, and I decided that maybe law was the most pedantic interpretation of the English language you would come across outside straight up literature or linguistics.
You just thinking there'd be loads of new words to put in your little thesaurus.
Loads of new words, loads of new words. Case precedent. It's like your back history of your reading list. You've got your story synopsises, your case synopsises, your protagonists, your villains, your heroes from that perspective. Apart from it was real people's life. That old statute law, which which is sort of incorrigibly dense in the way that it's written. That was your old like Chaucerian verse that you had to chew through to get a definition or a meaning out of it. Or up here, something like Walter Scott, discombobulating pieces of literature that you had no idea what was going on unless you really sort of quested into it with unwavering and quite frankly disgusting dedication. And then the advocacy, that was like your Shakespearean soliloquies, you know, you had to advocate from that perspective. It was so theatrical, it was so dramatic, and it was so emotionally driven whilst having this other base in it. So studied law whilst convincing myself I was still studying literature. I hoodwinked myself into the subject and loved it for that reason. But then it caused me to think, as I went from doing the degree to actually having a very brief career working as a lawyer in London, it caused me to think about what language can do to separate us. Because the language I liked was sort of quite kooky, esoteric language, but I would try and use it in a way that showed that almost I was a novice in using those words. I would use them cumbersomely. I would use them in the hope that I was using them invitationally with the drawbridge down. So if you came across them as a reader and you didn't know what that word would mean, you'd still felt welcomed in because you could feel like I was excited to be using the language and there was a warmth to it. Whereas law and legal parlance was the exact opposite. This whole lexical unit of jargon is invented for you to not understand what it means,
isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
To feel separated.
The drawbridge is up,
the drawbridge is up, and so that you then need to hire someone at a high cost, but you justify it because this stuff just looks indecipherable to you, and it was built to keep you out. It's got a white picket fence around it, so there was nothing invitational in the way that language used, and that was the real breaking point for me about sticking around in the law. And it's not to say there's not amazing things can be achieved within the legal spectrum, because of course there is, and I got to work a little bit for amazing people like the Wellcome Trust down in London who make incredible things happen with art and science, and offer a lot of people sort of hope and courage and support by the grants that they put out. But mainly it was this huge corporate machine, and I thought I want to take that style of language and try and make it more accessible. I want a lot of my friends that have not been to uni, that have not read the classics, to still feel this language could be for them. In a way, there's a sort of laying your workings bare, in the sense that hopefully in the way that sometimes I use the language, you can tell that maybe it's quite early on. It's quite in the nascence of my use of those words. I'm excited to be using them. You can tell that there's a particular scene or expression that's happening that's sort of built around this structure. And I've just discovered what this word means, so you don't feel too separate from it if you discover it for the first time and they're having to go and look up the definition. And I remind people, I didn't invent these words. You know, they existed long before me, and they'll exist long after me unless they evaporate or die out, or language moves on to a certain extent. And it's never, especially the number of people that read ebooks, it's never been easier to click on a word and look it up, and then all of a sudden.
I was just saying to John the other day, the terrible thing is I've been recently reading an actual book, a physical book, and then trying to press the word. And then just for a second, then you go, oh no, what are you doing here?
That's beautiful though. I love
confused between the mediums here.
I love the idea of you poking at a word on the centre of the page.
It's not working.
If I saw someone doing that to one of my books, it would be like a eureka moment. It's the one of the sort of ultimate accolades you could get. Someone just finger pawing at your book.
Tell us about your transition from lawyer to poet then, because that seems like quite a difficult thing to do. Was that quite painful? I mean, there must have been a certain joy in it because you were leaving something.
Was it a joyful escape?
Yeah, do you know, it was always the plan.
Right. Okay, so in the back of your mind, you're always like, this is a way into...
It was a hobby job till the far more financially lucrative career of poetry kicked off. You know, corporate law, you can pedal away at that point.
Okay, that's incredible.
But no, I was writing the whole time.
Right,
and I guess I was writing, you know, a lot of the time on corporate law firm clocks. Hiding those little poems between client letters, or I was doing a lot of due diligence research down in the legal libraries with my notepad, and you know, would deliver the minimum of what was required out of the legal situation. But so it was always with me. But it was just sitting down and having that discussion with myself whether this could actually feel like something I could do with more dedication, with more of a job element to it, and how that was going to manifest, particularly because I was writing exclusively poetry at this point in time. Your first poetry book deal is probably not going to rival a solicitor's salary in London.
Yeah, even one that does quite well, probably.
Even one that wins many major prizes is probably not going to rival that sort of degree. So it was finding something that might be workable. So I'd told myself I would do the 2-year solicitor's training contract in London, and I'd got a scholarship to do that. They paid for my postgrad, and then I had to work for them for 2 years and 2 weeks. 2 years as a trainee, 2 weeks as a fully qualified lawyer. And of course, it's unfathomable to that point that you would then withdraw yourself from the legal world, because you'll have got used to the salary, the theatrics of it all.
All the hard bit.
You've done all the hard bit. You're in.
Your
Training's over. Yeah. You're now a solicitor. You're on the solicitor's role, and your earning capacity is going through the roof. And that for me was the moment to leave, because that for me was the moment that you could get locked into this lifestyle. You know, I might have bought a house in London and then I'm locked in forever. Yeah. So I extracted myself from that situation. I've been writing a lot in between, and by that point in time I'd had quite a number of poems published in journals, magazines and e-zines. Over that 2 years I was in London, I was just slowly submitting. Of course I was getting far more rejections than acceptances at first, and then it sort of evened out a little bit, and then people were asking me for ones, so it felt like the writing had evolved and was connecting in a different way. I published my first little chapbook, like your EP to your album. You know, a chapbook can be anything from one long poem to about 10 or 12 poems. It allows you to bring this physical product out into the world and make every mistake you're going to make when you publish your first book on a sort of low risk trial period. It feels like it's a limited run. Chapbook publishers are normally run by, you know, retired high school English teachers that love poetry, so they are these really beautiful aesthetic objects, and they'll maybe print 250, 500 of them and then let them expire. So they're meant to be ephemeral objects that exist for a time and a place and then become little curios people might collect or disappear altogether. And I loved the idea of that, so I'd released one of them and sold out the run, and it'd been nominated for the wee chapbook award. And I thought, this is starting to get interesting. So I decided I needed to go. I thought I need to do one of these creative writing masters. Loads of my friends who are writers are doing them at this point in time. There's great writers attached to them. They're all the buzz. But then I thought maybe I just need more time and space to be able to read books and write, because I've never had that. It's always been the law and, you know, stealing illicitly moments out of the corporate day to write in between. So I decided to move to Cambodia for a year.
I was going to guess that. That was going to be my guess.
Yeah, that was it. That's where you were going.
It's the obvious choice, isn't it, really?
It's the obvious choice. I thought, I'm going to read all of these books that I've promised myself I'm going to read. And
in Cambodia.
And I'm going to develop a body of work that I think is worthy of being submitted to one of these publishers admire as a first collection.
Why did you pick Cambodia?
Quite cheap to live, is it?
A dartboard and an atlas? Or?
I'd been once before. I'd done a wee trip around Southeast Asia, and Cambodia at that point in time, outside the continent of Africa, was one of the least connected countries in the world with Wi-Fi and phone reception. So I liked the idea of being quite distant from that. I was part of like the BlackBerry generation in the legal corporate world. You know, all these new smartphones were coming in that meant you were contactable to your employer all the time.
7,
You weren't supposed to turn it off even when you slept, just in case someone kicked off. So I liked the idea of pulling out of that. Also, it was quite cheap to live. I'd saved up some money from being a lawyer in London, a sort of breaking up bonus from the legal firm. And I would have dwindled that in maybe 10 weeks, 12 weeks in London if I was renting a flat, trying to be a writer there. Whereas I could pretty much go and live for a year in Cambodia, which to me felt like enough of a period of time. Plus I'd had a bit of a poetry mentor at high school into my uni years. That makes it sound more official than it is. It was my friend's amazing stoner uncle who also wrote poetry and had published a few poems. That meant he was a real life poet. But he was so well read. It was the first person I met that encouraged me to write from that perspective. He wanted to record some of my poems on dictaphones, and it made me feel nurtured. So he'd went to live out there for a while and had just loved it. While I was working as a lawyer, I was getting all of his stories about learning to cook Cambodian dishes and learning little bits of the Khmer language and places he'd been exploring. So I went there and I took all my books with me and I spent a year writing. I did a little bit of teaching in one of the local free schools so that there was some other string to my bow when I was out there. And by the end of that year, I had enough poems to submit to a poetry publisher. There's a noise, isn't there?
There is a noise.
Is that all right?
There's a noise, made me lose my poise. 'Cause I'm trying to talk to my boys. And do I have a choice? Can you hear my voice? We'll try and carry on now and not throw our toys.
So yeah, spent a year writing there, developed what I thought was a collection of poems, sent them back to a few different places, and the publisher I wanted to publish it at that point in time was really interested. Said, we like the sound of this, let's talk more about it. You should have a chat with our editor. And eventually that came my first collection. And I came back, I miss it now. I miss the noise, it's gone. I came back from Cambodia and started working for this theatre workshop organisation. It was a Theatre Workshop Scotland, you know, partnered with a lot of the theatre workshops throughout the world, but they were making their first movie about the 1926 miners' strike. They were making a community feature film, sort of Ken Loach style. So I ended up getting involved in that, looking at bits of script, doing a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, doing marketing for them, applying to film festivals when the film was done. So got quite a creative job quite quickly. And then I guess the most seminal thing happened to me in writing at that point in time is I started a literary event company. It was called Noiriki. It ran for 10 years in Scotland. And we started as a poetry and flash fiction-y monthly event that paired up the poems with avant-garde animations. And then eventually music evolved into it. And what started as essentially a poetry and film club, a literary and film club, over the 10 years went from being Scotland's biggest regular spoken word and literature night. We had an office, staff, a small publishing house, a record label. We were putting on a lot of shows for National Galleries of Scotland, National Museum of Scotland. Right. We did like a huge festival for Hull City of Culture, for the Mayor of London's Borough of Culture. We took these shows to New York and Tokyo.
Oh, right. That's amazing. That's like just an incredible amount of networking you're doing at the same time.
Yeah.
So you're just meeting all these people and finding out all this stuff about.
Yeah, that was the thing. For 10 years, I got to bill my favourite writers at events. We were maybe working alongside Edinburgh International Book Festival or the Film Festival, so we were getting big stages, big platforms. We were very fortunate, and for the majority of our time, we had sponsorship of the Arts Council as well, because the event got very big very quickly.
Is it still going?
No, I put it to bed. There was me and another writer called Kevin Williamson. Now, he'd ran a press called Rebel Inc., who were like a punk press that became an imprint of Canongate. Now, that came to a calamitous and chaotic ending in, you know, legal disputes between Rebel Inc. and Canongate, and which was a beautifully fiery end, and everyone's like cool with each other now. But I was disappointed that I missed that. But I'd heard a little bit about Kevin, and we'd been billed to read together at different poetry events. We got along, started this night together, and it meant that he was bringing a lot of writers from the Rebel Inc. era who are either super successful now or had maybe been really successful and then had stopped writing altogether and were sort of coming back out of their shell. So there was a lot of mystique about that. And I was surrounded by writers that were hungry for their first short story publications or first poetry pamphlets. Plus we had a lot of bands around us publishing their first EPs or first albums. So there was real mixing of generations. And we were very fortunate. There was a big art centre called Summer Hall in Edinburgh, which hadn't opened at that point in time, and invited us in to be a resident there. And we got to run the first regular nights there, and everyone was really excited about this building. And then there was a place in Glasgow popped up called the Poetry Club, run by a Turner Prize nominated artist Jim Lambie, that he had built for him doing a collaboration with Richard Hell from Richard Hell and the Voidoids as a sort of venue installation. Called it the Poetry Club, and then said, look, I need someone to start running some cool nights here to put it on the map as a venue. And we ended up putting on events there, and we had John Juno, the American beat poet who ended up inheriting and living in William Burroughs' house. Primal Scream did a gig for us in there to 95 people. The headlines the next day was Primal Scream hit the small time. There was a young band in Edinburgh growing up around me in sort of Leith and Drylaw, all these different areas called Young Fathers at that point in time. We got them to do some sort of early gigs there to 90 people. They went on to win like the Mercury Prize, do all these collaborations with Massive Attack and become one of the most sort of interesting bands on the musical spectrum at the moment. So you're involved in this incredible scene, basically. Yeah, and it became a collective really quickly. It was the sort of big beat happening place of literature in Scotland for a long period of time. We had breweries do like a Noiriki beer based on the spirit of it. A whiskey company sponsored us to do this amazing tour called Anywhere But the Cities, because we'd been so successful in, Edinburgh, Glasgow, London, wherever we'd put on these shows. But how did this work in a Cayley Hall in Ullapool? Were we still going to get an audience there? Did we still have our fingers on the pulse of what would culturally appeal to people all across Scotland? Because, we were getting these nice banners like Scotland's premier avant-garde noisemakers and literary masterminds of the Scottish era. But it's like, but that's just Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Yeah, well, that means real people.
So we did this month-long tour and we were in like Orkney and Shetland and Mull and Skye and loads of the islands, loads of the Highlands, and we took all of these brilliant people on the road, from Aidan Moffat to Bill Ryder-Jones to Holly McNish to Liz Lockhead to King Creosote. Loads of people did all of these shows for us all, and it was always writers, musicians. Literature was at the core of it, and then we always had musicians which spoke into that literary sphere. So we did some pretty experimental stuff. We produced free anthologies of poetry and short stories based on all of the people that had written or been with us during that point in time. We had Margaret Atwood zooming in to do launches with us, Lennon Kwesi Johnson, like loads of amazing writers ended up reading there, and it became this beautiful thing. But then the opposite happened, But by the end of it, I was starting to feel a bit much like I was becoming the eternal compere. And I was introducing and interviewing lots of writers. And then I thought, Noiriki's becoming such a big and popular thing that I'm not getting any time to write myself. Yeah. And it's always a hard thing to do, to cut the mic on something that's giving a lot to a lot of other writers to take a bit for you. Yeah. And it just reached a natural end. Our 10-year anniversary year was supposed to be the year of COVID, so we put that off for a couple of years. And then at the end of that, we did this 10 years of Noiriki exhibition, which had photographs of the 10 years of shows. It had this beautiful, Andrew Weatherall had passed by that point, and there was a beautiful film about Andrew Weatherall that had been made from all of his appearances there. So we had this beautiful exhibition. We exhibited it in a cool sort of punky gallery in Edinburgh, and then naturally took it to the northmost contemporary arts gallery in the UK after that, up in Orkney, the Piers Arts Centre, and we brought Bill Drummond with us and Holly McNish. Bill made a bed on site in the gallery, which he then gifted to a member of the public in Orkney, who had to allow this wandering spirit of Elvis Presley to sleep there sometimes when he visited Orkney, but apart from that, it was their bed. So we did this really interesting run.
The standard T's and C's.
The standard T's and C's. Move to Cambodia, build a bed for the wandering spirit of Elvis Presley. And Bill is also someone that's very good at ending something in a dramatic fashion. The KLF, he ended in a very dramatic fashion, and same with most of his fortune and wealth. He's sitting out.
Absolutely.
So he was like, it feels like the right time. You're at your peak. There's no better time if you're feeling you want to withdraw from this thing, to end something, than in a blaze of glory. And I thought, well, you've made a career out of that, and you're in touch viscerally, physically, emotionally with what we've done here. So maybe it is the time. And we stopped. But it's a difficult thing to do because it does feel indulgent, and so many writers bemoaned us stopping it,
of course, because high and dry.
I guess we were getting bigger audiences than any other. But we were getting 1,000 people at these events. Sometimes there was nothing else like it in Scotland at that level outside of August during the festival. In fact, with Noiriki, we would often do a show on the first couple of days of September as a flag in the sand to say, look, culture doesn't end in Edinburgh on the 31st of August. There's international arts here all year round.
Tell us a bit more about Boyfriends, how that came about.
I know, I feel like we sort of sat down to have a preliminary chat.
So should we start this?
We probably start the interview now. Yeah, tell us a bit about Boyfriend, because it obviously the sort of impetus for it is not very happy, but
yeah. So Boyfriend is, as you touched upon there, came from a weird place. One of the most significant people I met during the Noiriki period was a singer and a songwriter called Scott Hutchison. He founded and was lead singer for an amazing band called Frightened Rabbit. He was also a beautiful illustrator. Frightened Rabbit had fans all over the UK, all over America, all over the world. They had top 10 albums, beautiful, tender, elegiac songwriting. People connected to it on a sort of deep emotional level. People saw Frightened Rabbit's Scottish songwriting as their faith. He was an incredible human being, and he was, you know, my most cherished friend in the world at this point in time. And Scott died suddenly, tragically, by his own decision. And I knew I needed to write about this human being, this grief, to try and understand it, to explore it. But I didn't want to write a grief memoir, because that's was so far afield from the person I missed, who was silly, they were soppy, they were sexy, they were all these beautiful, incredible things that were nothing to do with the deep, forlorn nature of grieving someone. And I wanted to write myself into investigation, into understanding, also just write myself out of distraction of things that I could do that were more harmful to me during such a sort of emotionally volatile period.
so it's an anti-grief memoir,
In
a
a sense. I basically decided the only thing I could do at that point in time was write about my favourite moments and remind myself of the joy that I was missing, and write myself into the situation where I felt closest to him. And it was in these moments. So in the most horrible emotional state, I wrote about all of these beautiful, hilarious friendship stories and quests and adventures we'd went on. And by the end of doing that, what could have been a grief memoir was a love letter to friendship, you know. And it wasn't just for Scott by the end of it, because that caused me to do an audit of all the wonderful friendships that were either in or had been in my life, and to want to pay tribute to all of them. And it became this huge sort of emotional sprawl of friendship love affairs, these short essays to all of these different friendships in my life, you know, and all the friendships here, there and elsewhere, and the friends we'd love to access. It still didn't feel like enough. And of course, you've got all these friends you promised to make more time to see. You don't always manage to make those moments come to fruition, but you still carry the anticipation of being in their company with you. And then, of course, it had to be for the friends that had left this world before their time, and how we celebrate them and pull ourselves closer to them in their absence. Do you want me to read a wee bit?
I would love you to. Yeah.
So I'm going to parachute you into the book at a point in time. I'm on a road trip through the Scottish Highlands, and I'm with Scott, and I'm with another writer I'd mentioned, Holly McNish, and you know, we're off on this great exploration. And Scott dies 48 hours later, after me and Holly drop him off on one of the stops on the road trips, to meet back up with him 2 days later. So in a sense, he doesn't come back from this road trip. He makes a damn good go of a seafood platter on the final night that we spend together. And that was one of the best meals I'd ever had with him. So on sort of revisiting, re-inhabiting that moment, I thought locked within it is my golden formula for friendship, perhaps. So many of my friendships have been forged around a dinner table. You know, often you've fought away from the clamour or busy moments to sit round a table together and sort of put sustenance into your body. And as someone that cannot resist a food metaphor every second sentence, it's a beautifully romantic place for me to be with people I love. And I thought that formula was the messier the meal, the better the friendship. And this was a particularly messy meal.
Love that.
Dinner with you and Holly. These are Palmery moments. No, I don't regret spending £75 on a seafood sharing platter. So this is 2018 as well. £75 maybe seems quite reasonable, man. You know,
Was it the happy hour? This is not reasonable.
Back then that would cause gas in Glasgow.
Yeah.
No, I don't regret spending £75 on a seafood sharing platter. Aye, it's a crumb indulgent, and you call me a lush to Holly's hilarity. But we were twinned in this bon ami. I do not regret us gorging ourselves on a platter, boasting an estimated 40 mussels, 60 prawn tails, 6 gargantuan langoustines, 12 scallops, 12 oysters, and a heft of dipping bread. A platter most definitely intended for filling more than 2 bellies. Of course there is wine. We would not do a meal such as this a discredit and be without it. The platter is its own constellation. It does not fit on the table, for its circumference is akin to Jupiter, not decommission Pluto. And you and Holly have to swap seats, so as we can battle this formidable foe together in formation. We are leviathans, feasting with and on each other. The messy display attracts nods of reverence from onlookers populating the tables in orbit around us. These nods, they're a cloud of praise comfortably taken. This comfort in taking praise is far too rare for brilliant you. And over yonder, the island of sky sits down to tea with us. We address it in stories and long glances cast over. On Google Maps, this water is labelled Inner Seas off the west coast of Scotland, Atlantic Ocean. A very formal name for our salty guest, the ghost at the table. Whilst eating the platter, there is a dearth of chatter. Let it be known, this is not portentous, it's the opposite. The gooey vim of not needing chit-chat. We are apples, here's our cores, sprouting pips in every belly. Even vegetarian Holly sooks a muscle back. But shush, don't tell her family, or she'll never hear the end of that. This supper is garlic butter gorgeous. Love on its tiptoes, the last meal we had together and one of your last on this whizzing planet. It wasn't quite fit for purpose, but I surmise you chip in with Michael. It wasn't far off either. P.S. Yes, we ordered starters and all, but these were modest and too alluring to let pass by. The pudding you shared with Holly was one step beyond for me, but yous looked cherubic splitting it, and you were often one step ahead. P.P.S. By the time the £149.50 plus £20 cash tip cleared from my bank account, 2 days later, you had left us, and something had left me. But right there, in that moment, we were brimful. It was love.
That's so good.
Do you remember writing that?
It was
Do you remember the process and how it came out? And did it come out whole, or did it need working and moulding? How did it come out of you?
So it was the first bit I wrote for the Book of Boyfriends. So I remember it distinctly because I remember resisting trying to write about the grief of losing Scott because I wanted to write about the way he lived, not the way he left. And that was my most recent happiest memory with him because it was the last meal we had together, last time I saw him physically, and it was such an incredible moment. And the fact that I still had like a sauce spill on my jeans from that meal that night, it hadn't even cleared from my bank account by that point in time. We were still in that moment in very many sort of kismet ways. I knew that that was a really interesting self-contained moment. Plus, seafood had become a bit of a trope for me and Scott. I'd written a book a few years before called Oyster, which was a collection of poems that Scott had illustrated, and we toured that together all over the world. We'd built a physical testimony to our friendship via this book, and he would play songs and I would do poems, and we'd swap between the two. And we were planning to do a lot more of them. And one of the last things Scott had said to me, which I then go into after that story, was every time he'd done a Fright Rabbit album or a significant project, he said he often got a tattoo to signify that he was sort of anchoring that into his skin, it having came from somewhere underneath all of that. And he said, I didn't have any tattoos by this point, and he said, but don't forget, we're going to get that oyster tattoo together. I've not forgotten about it. And he had mentioned it earlier on in the tour process, and I had sort of slunk out of it, didn't have any tattoos, wasn't sure I wanted one, was on the fence with it, but if he'd wanted one, I was so sort of joyous in his presence, I would have went for it. And then, of course, Scott dies, and I think, well, that's a pact, isn't it? That's one of the very last things he said to me at the meal before going off to bed was, don't forget, I still remember about those oyster tattoos. So I got my one, which is the open oyster shell, and it looked a bit lonely up there. So I ended up getting his one, which is the closed oyster shell. He said he would get the closed one because it looked a bit wartier and was maybe the gimpier of the two tattoos. So he would take the hit on that perspective. So I got them that way. So it was almost to psych myself into getting these tattoos that I wrote that poem. And it was the first thing I wrote about losing Scott, and I wanted it to be a positive experience despite how foreboding it was in terms of where it's ended, which is, I guess, why I put those more grief-filled indulgences in the PS and the PPS, because it kept the story only about the love of the meal, and anything else I needed to say I've almost footnoted into it.
It sort of encapsulates the idea of the book in a way as well, doesn't it? That poem.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that.
Nice. Really beautiful, that.
And it just gave, writing the book gave me one more thing to feel grateful to him for. I'll forever be buoyed up and galvanised by that friendship. Scott wasn't just, my dearest friend at that point in time. He had so many friends. He was such a beautifully popular person, but he was also, had became the singer in my favourite band and one of my favourite artists. So there was this cataclysmic hole that I had to fill in as a friend, as an admirer, as a fan, all of it, as a collaborator. It wasn't just one. That very rarely is, but it wasn't just one ilk of the relationship that I was having to grieve at that point in time. But it caused me to go back and pay gratitude to all of these incredibly vital friendships in my life. And I actually picked the friendships that were no longer in my life because they were the friendships that society would have deemed failures because they weren't here, they weren't actively renewing ourselves. We'd maybe moved away politically. There's friends that have went sort of deeper into drugs and alcohol than, I was prepared to go and have never really came back from that. They're all still alive, but we've all still lost touch in lots of different ways. Yet I still salvaged and harvest so much joy and spirit and strength from those friendships. They still form such a vital part of my emotional kit bag when I go to make new friends in social situations that I felt they were the opposite of failures, and I wanted to still pay tribute to the friendships that had been lost from my life yet still offered me some emotional sustenance in the hope that it would encourage or catalyse other people to do the very same thing. And that was one of the most beautiful things about writing that book is, we didn't struggle to get blurbs or endorsements for it because any blurb or endorsement I got from the book then came with a long email or a long letter about a friend that they'd been reminded of that they wanted to talk about. And it just served a sort of galvanic thrust in my ribs about the fact that maybe we need to keep talking about this because we're given so few opportunities to just talk soppily, vehemently and wholeheartedly about the friendships that have inhabited our life. They can get pushed aside so easily in terms of long-term romantic pursuits.
I think people don't explicitly think about them. It's just you're just trotting through life and that's just what happens and you don't massively... And to actually step out of that and to stop and to categorise them and analyse them and by doing that put a value on them rather than just not thinking about them, which then almost means there isn't a value because they're not being considered.
I mean,
that's something everyone does.
I think that's the nice thing about being a writer, isn't it? Is that you actually you have time and space to think about those things.
Rather than just being on the inside. You get to look at it.
There's a certain amount of guilt as well, I think, that comes along with thinking about old friendships that have expired.
So ignoring them is easier.
Maybe. It's just, it's almost like,
in the air technique.
Should I have been better? It's almost like that kind of thing. But that's a really nice way of looking at it. That they can still bring you joy. Even though that's ended, it's not around anymore.
And in no way, I got asked about this a lot, in no way was I trying to bring any of those friendships back into my life. I liked viewing them as total beings at that point in time, because then you can give yourself this 360 view around them, especially as a writer. You can see where they started, see where they ended, see when they were in their sort of floriat, when they were in their sort of beautiful halcyon days period, and then you can see when they start to crumble and you can work out why and see what that says about yourself at this point in time. And they're these beautiful, ephemeral, fully formed beings for you to relish, gurgle with, analyse, embrace. But just to really spend a bit of time in the company of the version of yourself that was in that friendship. I guess that's maybe why you don't want them in your life, because you're no longer the version of yourself that was in that friendship. And they're probably no longer the version of their self, and you might not get along anymore, and don't ruin it. If they do come back into your life naturally, then that can be a beautiful thing, but in no way was I trying to hook them back in. I just wanted to pay tribute to what they were without trying to talk about what they could be.
Are you happy with how much you think about these things? Is it a burden sometimes that your brain works like that?
No, I don't think so.
It could be overwhelming if it's
and if
it's a fine line between that and sort of anxiety and kind of being too in depth and always thinking about it and being an overthinker, inverted commas.
Yeah, but if I get smothered in the sentiment of my past friendships and that's what drowns into my dreams late at night, then I consider myself a fortunate human being.
Soul fuel.
It doesn't seem, it seems giddy to say so, but it's in one way it's too much, but in the real sense it's not enough. I love thinking about these friendships. And, I wasn't done writing about friendship by the time. Where do you end a book like that when, you're still alive, you're telling it from your perspective, you've still got friends around you, there's no obvious end. So it was just finding a way to stop. And when I started writing
Michael's showing off about how many friends he's got. I've got so many friends. I could write book after book about the friends.
Well, I've got so many memories of friends to dwell on.
Oh, yeah, ex-friends. You have a lot of ex-friends. That's the story.
Yeah. But, that book came out in the UK, it came out in the US, and I got to do these beautiful tours. If someone else had written a book about friendship, be it fiction, screenplays, I even got put on a panel with a clinical psychologist who gave advice to friends experiencing friendship breakups and things like that. So if someone had invested their time and sapience in the world of friendship, there's a good chance I'd sat alongside them at a book festival. So by the end of touring it, I was this human hard drive of other people's friendship lore and my own, that I saw that the writing was taking me into fictitious realms. I was ready to stop talking about my own life and start building characters that could explore those emotional quests and dilemmas that it came across. And that's when non-fiction became fiction for me.
Was that a seed for Muckleflugger then?
Yeah, very much.
Right.
That's where I had to go to keep exploring those conversations and not talk about my life. It doesn't mean there's not tinctures of me and characters and human beings that I've came across in these fictitious characters, but they are their own fully formed beings. They are a sort of complex stew of other people's emotionality, each of them, and in which they become singular beings. And every bias and every stereotype that I've, I guess, more surface level put into them, by the end of a few drafts, they've shed them like a snake sheds its skin, and it almost feels like you've invested so much time in them that they're making their own decisions. And I've always thought that was a bit cliched when writers were saying it. It's like, of course, no, you're the master of this universe.
But they do, don't they? They really do start taking on their own. And then they surprise you with, that's when it's weird.
They're object.
Think, well, that's weird.
I don't want you to do that, but you're suggesting there's no other way to write it.
Yeah. Did you know that was going to be a novel when you started with us? Because it seems obviously that seems a very fluid transition from the previous sort of project.
I knew it had to be fiction, and I knew it was too big for a short story. So towards the end of Boyfriends, I knew I needed to take this somewhere else. And I'd written Boyfriends in a building called the Curfew Tower in Cushendall in Northern Ireland. It's owned by Bill Drummond, and he gives it out to artist residencies year on year. And I'd written it in this big edifice, this 250-year-old watchtower with a veritable dungeon in the basement of it, looking out across the Cushendall coastline, almost back to Scotland. So looking at my life from this big guardian, whilst not being able to touch any of it. So I could only be a spectator from that perspective. And I knew if I was going to write into the fiction world and write these characters into authenticity, they too had to have their own watchtower. But it being set in Scotland, it wasn't going to be in a curfew tower. It needed to be in a lighthouse. I love lighthouses. They're like street lamps of the Whale Road. I heard that expression, but it just like blew my little cotton socks off. So I essentially went on a treasure hunt to try and find the right lighthouse to set this story in.
They're quite easy to find, aren't they? If you do it at night time, I tell you, that's when you do it.
That's the way. Yeah. It's casting off its beacon into the darkness as a way of offering hope and support and courage, to offer people safe passage through treacherous waters, or to show them that this is coastline, someone's living there, there's warmth, and there's human inhabitants there who care about them. About them not colliding with those rocks. So it's casting out support and courage, and it's a life-saving apparatus which casts out a beam of luminosity into the darkness in the sort of spirit of existence. So it's such a beautiful being, and Scotland's got so many of them in particular. Do you know the family of Robert Louis Stevenson, the writer that went on to write, Kidnapped, Treasure Island, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? His family, for 3 generations above him, were lighthouse engineers and designers. Collectively, they designed and engineered nearly all of Scotland's great lighthouse that bejewel the coastlines there. So I got to go on this quest to find the right Stevenson lighthouse, and again Bill Drummond comes back into it. He invited me up to help him organise and deliver this show in Unst, which is the most northerly inhabited island in the UK currently, up in the north of Shetland, and on it sits the most northernly used arts venue in the UK called Baltusam Town Hall, and he was putting a film on there. We did some poetry, all sorts of different stuff. And a guy comes to the show and he says, look, maybe you guys want to come to mine for brunch tomorrow. I live in this interesting house. So we came along to his for brunch because we were staying in this weird abandoned RAF base up on Unst, which was quite spooky. It felt like the scene of a horror movie, so it was nice to get out of there quite quick in the morning. And this guy lived in Muckleflugga Shore Station. It was the shore station where the lighthouse keepers stayed when they were off duty. And Bill at this point revealed it was his birthday, put on a birthday boy hat and produced some presents that he brought up with him in a sack. So the afternoon took a slightly different slant. But after that, we went for a big walk along the coastline, and Muckleflugga is just there, like the last giant at the end of the earth, this lighthouse. When lighthouse keepers lived on Muckleflugga in the census, it made it the most northerly inhabited island in the UK. And to give you a sort of geographical proximity, if you stood in the gallery, the bulb room of the lighthouse in Muckleflugga, you'd be closer to the North Pole than you are to London. So it gives you, if you wanted to go somewhere isolated and extreme to debate the value, the concerns, the existence of your life in the wider spectrum under the gargantuanness of a canopy of stars and the, you know, vicissitudes of the weather in front of you, this would be a pretty animated, formidable place to do it.
Do take a coat.
You must have been quite excited when you saw that and heard the name as well.
Yeah, well, the name, there was so much in it. Basically, I then saw that lighthouse and thought, this is the one I was looking for. It's been built by...
It's a light bulb moment.
It's been engineered and designed by Stevenson's dad. It's called Muckleflugga, which sounds like either me trying to say a profanity by innuendo, very cleverly and very lyrically, or a made-up place, a fantastical realm invented by Tolkien or Lewis Carroll or another one of these writers. But it's not. It's a very real place. And also, then came in the folklore of it. The Shetlandic folklore says that the island of Muckleflugga and Outstack, its sort of neighbouring island, were actually formed by two warring giants called Saxa and Herman, who were always quarrelling with each other, and to demonstrate their brawn, their machismo, their braggadocio, they would throw these huge rocks into the water.
Do you know what
try
they were fighting about? What was the...
I think anything.
Like,
at one point,
normally women or...
I was going to say, it's probably...
At one point, the main quarrel was on account of a vicious temptress of a mermaid who was swimming by on those waters. But in fact, the way I read it, they were catcalling this mermaid. They were quite sort of tempestuous.
It was different times back then, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean?
She's just trying to get on with her mermaid business.
Through modern lens.
And you know, eventually she capitulates and she says, right, I've had enough of you two. By the time we're done with this, I'll be dead. So let's just reach a conclusion. I'm going to swim to the North Pole. Whichever one of you gets there quickest can have my hand in marriage. So they, of course, start shoving each other full of braggadocio. They thrash into the water like epileptic fish and then suddenly remember that neither of them can swim and they both sink to the bottom of the ocean and die. And one of the characters in my novel, Oos, the lighthouse keeper's son, he thinks that's the most romantic story he's ever heard. And I'm inclined to agree.
Was that part of the mermaid's plan? Did she know that? Or was she...
She just wanted rid of them.
She lured them into them.
No, I think she was taking a hit. I think she was...
She'd be like just swimming away for it. Yeah, they're not... Oh, well,
yeah.
This has not gone to plan.
I think it was a lilted conclusion to what otherwise would have been a pretty dreary life from henceforth for her. Yeah. But yeah, the two biggest boulders they threw into the water during their fiercest quarrel became Muckleflugga and Outstack. So my Muckleflugga had to be all those things. It was historical in the sense that I was writing about this lighthouse that had been built during the Crimean War to light those waterways for Navy vessels to pass, and was built out of war and hasn't stopped battling since, known as the Impossible Lighthouse for how difficult it was to assemble that at that extremity, but it also had to be that fantastical folkloric story behind it. So my Muckleflugga becomes this weird blend of the history of the island and the history of the Stevensons and a sort of more phantasmagoric story. My Muckleflugga is 10 times the size. The strange surfacings out there in the deep.
Would you be able to read as an extract?
I'd love to. On the island of Muckleflugga sits one of the most formidable lighthouses on this or any planet. Its wild peril of light is capable of guiding boats and their humans to safety, in spite of all manner of storms, gales and hails, not to mention whirlpools, pirates, straying submarines and a litany of other hunters of the aquatic deep. As for the more malevolent presences, the light keeps at bay, the less said the better. on account of being charged by starlight. The beam of Muckle Flugga Lighthouse is rumoured to be infinite in its luminosity. The great beam, which starts the size of a modest meteor if mishandled, has been known to dwindle to little more than the circumference of a gold coin. That might sound useless, but to a poor soul lost in a thick har or pernicious squall, even a glisk of light can prove enough to rope the way home. The island itself is a dramatic uprising of rocks, precipitous cliffs and treacherous walkways, rocky enough to be deemed born of volcano, sequestered enough to have been described by some as the one true space station of the sea. Like many lands deemed unwieldy to the human foot, it has been branded a shapeshifter by those that lose their way. Despite being its most devoted and only inhabitants, Us and the father, in their grief, have taken to regarding these buildings as the places relatives once lived in, rather than their very own home. The father's name is not on any deeds, nor Us's either, yet there's more of their blood seasoning the soil than some who died here, and the memory of the mother is kilted into the sky. It is both a simple and a complicated life for Us and the father on Muckle Flugga. Mercurial as the moon might make it, night after night the lighthouse tears its silhouette into the horizon, taking the gloaming to task for the sins it's covering over. The same stars that reflect dreamily in Muckle Flugga's window panes are those that send ships spinning in circles until the sea is ready to claim them and all life on board. I know that off by heart, but I sort of just like it there just in case.
Yeah, I get that.
That's like with All of Boyfriends, I can do about 10, 20 pages of it off by memory now. But I guess because I'd toured poetry books so much by that point in time, and often you're touring big theatres and I'm touring alongside performers like, Holly McNish or Jackie Kay or different people who inhabit the theatre space well, that to pick up a prose book and read from it, it didn't quite carry the type of exuberance I wanted to deliver.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah.
When it's just coming out of you.
Yeah. So I memerised it and I sculpted stories around it. And I've done the same with the novel, but because the novel's newer, I sort of print the words out and they're there.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can absorb them by osmosis if I need them.
I have to say,
put your hand
your
up.
writing is so enveloping.
Well, it's not really prose, is it? It's poetry, really.
It just feels like it's just surrounding you.
Yeah.
And you're in it.
It's just extremely luscious.
Fantastic.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Give us a bit of pitch, just for listeners. Give us, because we've talked about it, but
we sort of dived in there without.
Yeah. I also wanted to maybe this is a way in, but I wanted to ask you what your relationship is to Robert Louis Stevenson. You, Michael, what's your relationship to Robert Louis Stevenson?
So, it's sort of trifold. My earliest memory of poetry is my mum, who was a nursery nurse in Leith, putting the poems of Robert Louis Stevenson from A Child's Garden of Verses to music on her guitar. She looked after a lot of the kids that had behavioural problems or social difficulties, or I guess some of the kids that actually maybe wouldn't then progress into standard education for whatever reason. And she would do this form of what would maybe be called music therapy, but she would clip me around the ear for giving it such a clinical name, for them to engage with words and stories via music and poetry. And it was my earliest memory of someone delivering poems in a theatrical form as my mum putting these kids' poems to music. So it was always ingrained in my psyche, and I guess it lit a fuse for me for the writing of Stevenson. I read some of the adventure stories when I'm younger, but they don't necessarily, I very quickly move on to Tolkien, and I'm obsessed for many years. So Stevenson doesn't really get a look in. And then a few years later, when I'm starting to write the book Oyster, that is the one that I collaborate with Scott on, I win the Robert Louis Stevenson Fellowship, and I get to go to a place called Grès-sur-Léon, which is southwest of Paris near the Fontainebleau forest. It was an old hotel called Hotel Chivignon, which was a sort of home for Bohemia during the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, and loads of composers and artists and writers would go there, shunning Paris, which had become too bourgeoisie by that point. And this is where the real sort of cockamamie art zest was. It's like an epoch of time, like when you had in Paris later on, when you've got Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and all of these figures talking there.
Happen in the same space at the same time.
At this point, it was in Grès, and Stevenson goes there to visit his artist cousin. He meets Fanny Osborne, who becomes his wife at that point in time, who has ran away from a philandering husband in California and moved to France to paint. And it's just this really vibrant, beautiful place. I got to be there for a month. You get some money for it. It was the swankiest writerly accolade I'd had at that point in time. So I felt indebted to him. I felt thankful to him because he was so good at doing what he did. I got to take a month off of my life. I got a cash investment. I got a heralded prize, and I got to take myself more seriously as a writer. And I also then got to write the collection that became Oyster that I collaborated with Scott. I was also on the cusp of a new relationship at this point in time, like Stevenson was there. So there wasn't just sort of literary luster in the air. There was also real, emotional lust. So I was so thankful to this residency and this writer. And then I took it upon myself. I almost had an obligation to invest more deeply in his work. But it was his letters that drew me in. He was one of the best letter keepers in literary history. There's 7 volumes or 6 volumes of these beasts, all 500 pages long. So you navigate them gently. But what really appealed to me was his friendship letters. He struck up such great mentorial friendships over his career because he became one of the most popular writers in the world during his lifetime. So he was financially successful, he was critically successful, and he gave so much back to young writers, and particularly a young J.M. Barrie who went on to write Peter Pan. So they had this 10-year correspondence where Stevenson is calling him the greater scribe of the two, and I am just a writer, but you are touched by something. He's really generous in his praise and his accolades, and that version of Stevenson is the one I wanted to portray. So when it comes to the novel, we're going back to a point in time where the island is inhabited by a lighthouse keeper and his otherworldly son. This lighthouse keeper is sort of half in love with the world, half in hate with it. He's full of whiskey and ire. It's how he feels about himself when he looks in the mirror. Yet at the same time, he mans that lighthouse like it'd take 10 other keepers to do so. His otherworldly son, Oos, he's of an artistic deportment. He wants to sew and knit and create these beautiful knitwear creations to keep people warm during the coldest seasons. He's at a juncture in his life whether he takes over a lighthouse or pursues his own artistic pursuits, and everyone is trying to affect Oos's life. He's the youngest and maybe the most whimsical and vulnerable character out of them. There's a writer from Edinburgh, Firth, that comes up to spend the summer there, a writerly dandy from Edinburgh. I'm not sure where I got the idea for that character. And Firth arrives full of flamboyance and literary kudos, and Oos thinks he might be the answer to every question he's just learning how to ask. What we don't know about Firth is 2 days later he was hanging off the side of a bridge himself, debating his own worth under the dominion of the stars. In fact, he felt he was a pernicious human being that was going to cause pain to everyone in his life if he continued to exist. But I didn't want to introduce you to a character in the bog of that. So very quickly, as soon as you meet him at the start of the book, so it's not a spoiler, I take him down from that bridge, and you actually meet a character clawing his life back from the ashes, so that every gulp of air, every day, every moment he goes on to live is actually in defiance of death, and his whole life is an anthem of survival. And it's not infallible from then on in. It's not full of Puritan behaviour. Yet the fact that he decides to go on living is enough. But I couldn't leave Oos alone when everyone wants to. Firth becomes obsessed with him and his talent and wants to bolster his life. The father wants him to take over the lighthouse. Everyone wants something from Oos, and he's lost in the wilderness of it all. So I thought he needs a life coach and he needs a confidant. And who would this kid want? And well, he'd want his favourite writer, Robert Louis Stevenson. The problem is Robert Louis Stevenson's dead at this point in time that we're writing the book. I thought, well, maybe that's not a problem. So I exhume Stevenson from the dead and I give him to Oos as a life coach and confidant in his sort of ghostly spectral form. He appears to Oos during some of the big decisions and offers him advice and companionship. And not always necessarily, straight between the eyes logical advice. A lot of the time he's doing hat tricks with his lilac felt fedora and is trying to regale him with conquest of his own past. But he deeply loves Oos and is invested in his future. So it's this sort of intense character drama between all of these curious human beings caught on this island. Oos and the father have just lost the mother, so her memory's sort of kilted above them. Yet she's there as a figure of betterment. She makes them the ameliorated beings that they want to be. She's there as a figure of encouragement that they want to do proud. And the island itself becomes a bit of a character. You can't write about an island in that extremity, looking off into that abyss with that much literary history to it and not let it become its own beautiful being. So Muckle Flugga very much is also a novel of place and identity. And I guess that's the pitch for the book.
Wow. Did you struggle to write like a normal blurb that was 12 lines long?
Yeah.
Because there's so much.
There's quite a lot in there.
There's a lot,
isn't it? How do you distill that down into a...
To be honest...
read it in the bookshop and decide to pick it up. That's tricky.
I mean, I think the publishers took it out of my hand.
Yeah, that's probably why.
There's my version.
There's no way you can. Yeah.
There's my version of the story, and there's how Marketing wrote the blurb.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it sounds quite fairy tale. Yeah. The way you describe it.
I wanted, if it was going to be a tribute to Stevenson, it had to be fantastical.
Yes.
It had to be an adventure story. You had to feel like you were questing to Michael Pederson. I wanted it to be transportational. One of the lead characters is a ghost. You know, that depends how you feel about the supernormal, though.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's wrap up with... What's next? What's coming up? Obviously, that came out relatively recently.
Yeah,
didn't
it came out end of May, start of June. You know, it's just out in hardback. It's coming out in paperback next year. And also, beautiful thing about a story is it travels the world a little bit. So next year, it's coming out already in French, German, and Spanish.
Right, okay.
So as you can imagine, I need to make myself quite available to the translator. There's a lot of poetic metaphor. There's abstruse language in there alongside Scottish vernacular. It's not made to be translated.
No, this is a pretty good job for a translator, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is a learning expedition for a translator.
I've been working dedicatedly with all these translators to make sure the version of Michael Pederson that arrives in France, Germany and Spain is as true and authentic to the story.
Of actually what you've tried to put on the page.
Which feels like writing a new book to a certain extent.
Yeah, well, there must be choices to be made.
Yeah, there's real creative differences that you have to jump that gulf. So it's been a beautiful thing to do. Also, I'm sort of in my first year as the Makar, the Poet Laureate here in Edinburgh. So there's lots of interesting poems. I've been asked for that. Recently, I did one about reaching out for hope for a Samaritans campaign. I was the UK Poetry Ambassador for Independent Bookshop Week. So I got to write this beautiful love letter to bookshops. And the next thing that I've just been tying down is a celebration poem for Edinburgh University Medical School turning 300 years old, and all of the doctors and medical staff that have been spat out into the world, particularly the NHS, on account of this university and what that means. And, you know, early chloroform was invented in Edinburgh, and they first discovered some anaesthetic properties here. So they say this is the birthplace of like chloroform, the anaesthetic. Right. Yeah. Elsie Ingalls, who pioneered like female nursing and medical surgery, came from Edinburgh. I was born in Elsie Ingalls Hospital, so there's a lot of medical history to pay homage to in the city. So I've been working my way into that. It's a 2-book deal with Faber. I owe them another novel at some point. I'm starting to get scratching on that, but yeah.
It sounds like you're quite busy in the meantime. So.
It's great. And, you know, that's the thing. Talking about coming out of law to be a writer didn't necessarily mean I was going to write this book and that was going to be my job. It's all those plates. It's being like the Poet Laureate for a city and writing all these poems. I've just finished as writer-in-residence at Edinburgh University, which has required me to do all these sort of showcasing of literature and celebrating the pervasiveness of language, university and citywide, and then juggling the poetry and the prose alongside that, and all of these things together become
your job, effectively.
What a huge privilege!
Yeah. Amazing.
What a responsibility to some extent, but what a privilege to be that voice, to be that conduit.
It's something that I take really seriously, really humbly, and have a unabridged optimistic joy about fulfilling each of the roles, because whatever version of myself I wake up in as the morning, whether it's, you know, this vivacious sort of bounding off the walls version of myself, or whether it's a sort of curmudgeonly slow moving version of myself, there's a form of writing that needs done under that guise. So it's amazing to be this sort of octopus with all of these different tentacles.
Kind of a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde sort of.
There we go. That's a nice analogy to finish on, isn't it?
Well, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you. What a brilliant, lovely way to spend an hour and a half, as it turned out.
Yeah, sorry about that. We kept you
possibly one of our longest ever interviews. Thank you so much for your time.
You use too many words, that's the problem.
It doesn't help when I give a 20-minute answer to quite a laconic question. I could just say, sounds good. That's not why we're here.
Thank you very much.
Would say, well, don't worry, we'll just edit that out. But that's
like it just have to be a long episode. So that's amazing.
Normally, John, we come off the back of an interview, don't we? And we all, it's a joke now, but we go, oh, weren't they lovely? Weren't they lovely? But Michael wasn't really lovely, was he? He he went further than there was something when we came out. It felt like we'd been in some kind of life-changing. Yeah, it was just amazing.
It was genuinely wonderful. He was such a nice guy, but I think we were both a little bit beguiled by him, weren't we? I think we both had sort of like writer crushes on him.
Yeah, completely. And we came out and we were still sort of, after apologising for keeping him 40 minutes longer than we said we would in the first place, we were still chatting with him on the street outside the shop. And then he, bless him, he offered me tickets to his sold-out gig, which I was gutted that I couldn't actually go to in the end. But he's just like, just such a brimming with positivity and light. Amazing. Yeah. I hope that came across in the interview. Yeah. If it didn't, that's your problem, not our problem, and you need to sort it out. So in the show notes, there are lots of links to where he's out and about and doing his bits and bobs. Yeah.
Go meet him.
He's
awesome.
It's just, absolutely.
Also in the show notes, links there, obviously, to get yourself copies of his books, which are genuinely wonderful. Yeah. There's no one really quite writes like him. Honestly, you've got to delve in, have a go.
It's a treat. It's a treat of stuff to read.
It is. It's a beautiful. Well, it's like his seafood platter. That's what it is. Yeah. It's like almost like an overindulgence. That's what it is. I think that's enough, isn't it? Probably, because this podcast is getting quite long. We should probably wrap it up here. Yeah. So let's just thank Scrivener again.
Thank you, Scrivener.
And if you enjoy the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and maybe tell a couple of people. Yeah. Just if you told 2 people and they told 2 people, we'd have an amazing kind of Ponzi scheme going on, wouldn't we?
Yeah, the maths is mental on that, isn't it? I think within a week we would have the entire world listening or something.
That would be pretty cool.
So please do that. Yeah.
Also, we love hearing from you.
We do.
Finding out what you've been writing. So get in touch. You can email us, failingwriterspodcast@gmail.com. And we're on all the socials as well, @failingwriters. So, yeah, get involved.
Absolutely. Remember, we might be going away soon for end of season and coming back for season 6 in a bit. But that's a good chance for you to send in your stuff that maybe we want to put on Hype Writer next season. So, yeah, we love reading your stuff.
Indeed, yeah. Right, see you next time for more adventures on our Scottish Odyssey.
Yeah, next episode we've got a sneaky peek at the great titans of Scottish literature. So, join us for that.
Yeah, join us for that. Even if that doesn't sound like your bag, honestly, you're going to enjoy it.
Feels like a weird place to end that, but there wasn't anything else to say, was there? Yeah. We'll just end it there. Yeah, it's fine. Music comes up, bits come in. Yeah. It's fine. Everyone's used to that by now.
Got to end it differently, haven't you? I'll say bye every time.
Do you think we should just come back in and say goodbye, though, just because it feels weird? Can we just say bye?
Yeah, let's do it.
Just say bye now.
Just in case.
Bye then.
Bye.
Ta-ra. I've chucked in a ta-ra just as an extra. It felt like then that was a bit more.
Nice. I like that. I think people will really, really appreciate that, Tom.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Where's everybody gone?